So you're probably in a situation like I am where you really want to get into engraving or setting, and you're looking at a ball vise and you're looking to like GRS or Lindsay, and they are some fantastic tools, but they do have that costly price tag attached. And in my current situation in life, engraving for me is just a hobby, but I really do enjoy it. But I did go out and purchase a cheap ball vise when I begin with, just to help me get started. But when I got this one, there were a few issues with it. It does do the job, but there are some things that I've done to it to make it a little bit better, a little bit nicer to work with. So I just wanted to highlight these in this video just so others can replicate some of the mods I've done and make it a much better engraving ball vise to work with. So enough talking, let's get straight into it. So here is my lovely little knockoff ball vise, and it is a bit clunky. It took a little bit to start with, especially with the vice jaws. Like, it really didn't hold the things I wanted until I did the first mod that we'll go through. But what you're looking for is this style one. There are a few different types out there. I haven't seen the 3-inch version on the inside, but specifically the Vevor ones, the ones that replicate the new GRS ball vise, they actually press fit the bearings inside of it, so they're really hit and miss and you can't pull them apart. Unlike this one where you can get access to the whole inside, pull out the bearings and change them out. So I just wanted to cover the mods that I've done for this one. And starting out, I think the easiest one is just getting some fueler gauges, because this vice jaw itself, like, it's not machined to a very close tolerance, so there was a lot of wiggle. But what you want to do is, I've got some stainless steel shims that I've modified and put in there just to make it a lot nicer to work with, and it really does force that jaw into a nice tight tolerance. So when I'm working, the jaw heads are not splaying out when I'm clamping on things. So if anything, just get some feeler gauges, measure the gaps in between here, then use that to go buy some sheet stock, use some tin snips to cut it up, and then pressure fit that stuff in there. I've just bent it over the legs, so if I take it out a bit further, as you can see, I've taken over the legs, and really that is the first mod I would recommend doing for this, because it just turns a cheap little vise into something that is a lot nicer to work with. So the next mod on here that I would recommend is just getting a little bit of leather and sticking it into this little part here, because what happens is this metal plunger goes straight onto a ball bearing there. So as you can see, a little ball bearing lives in there, so I'll just put him back in there. And if we have a look at this part here, I'll just take the little bit of leather out. Like, it doesn't need much, but this will give a little bit of dampening. So you can half close this and have it so it's frictioned. So when you're hand engraving, or I do hammer and chisel, you can just rotate it, and the weight of this pressing down on that ball bearing, it's going to close it up just enough so you can rotate it, but it's stiff enough that your hammer and chisel won't wander. Another little tip, put a bit of oil behind that bit of leather so it sticks in that cup, so you don't have to like try and finesse it in there or have it like directly up and down to put it on. So this next part is probably more for hammer and chisel, but this ball vise, just how the bearing is set up, it's pretty much just a flat bearing sitting at the bottom down here. So when you're engraving in the center, it has enough force to stop it deflecting, but when you're engraving out around the edge, what tends to happen is this whole top part will move towards the center. So what I've done for that, and you saw that earlier, if I take off the top, you can see I've put a whole bearing ring around here. So I'm pretty sure this is a needle flat bearing that I found online through an automotive place, but it's only 4mm thick, or I think that's 1/8 of an inch. But I've done some brass work in there, so I've taken a strip of square brass, curved it around and did a solder joint on it, so I've got a bearing outside. Got some 3mm sheet metal to create a bearing holder, just because I don't have access to a lathe, but you can easily do that. Like, I use that to cut it all out and just made it a lot nicer. And I replaced that internal bearing in there as well. So with the dual bearing setup now, it is quite a lot more stable, especially around the edge. And because there's so many of these little tiny bearings as well, the whole system doesn't deflect. So I can sit there, engrave on the outside, and I know it's not going to deform or buckle. And really the only movement that I have now in this vise is just a little bit of movement inside that whole bearing. Like, if I was to design my own one, I'll try and use a tapered roller bearing, something like that, in the bottom part, but Really, I don't have access to a metal lathe, and I have a few tools and a little bit of ingenuity, and that mod there just made this ton better for hammer and chisel engraving. So the last mod about this ball vise is understanding that you can just make your own pins for this. Like the little tool accessories part really was nice to get, but I feel some of these parts really just come from like artifacts of where they took the design from. Like I'm pretty sure these are designed for the GRS one, so they slot into bigger holes down here, and then there was the plates that sit on it. Like there's no way that you can sit that in there and hook onto your device, so they're pretty much useless to me. And I do have some of the GRS parts. Really, each one of these pins do have a bit of wobble inside their hole. Not too much for some, but it definitely is there. And part of me wanted to ream out each of those holes, but just because of how these ones are sitting so close to the edge, reaming them out to a little bit bigger might make it a little bit weaker. But this is where just having like a strip of brass, so this is the same tolerance here for me. I think I figured it out to be 3.5 mil or whatever the equivalent is for American units. But some brass, a little bit of leather, I could start making my own accessories to do the work holding that I needed. So like I made some really thin pins with some flat ends for when I'm holding on to pendants, and I can push in the bevel there. I just made these today to help out hold some pendants where I want to engrave the edges for. So just taking that and then sorting out, building your own parts for this, it does open up a lot more for what the device is. And you don't need, like I do have access to a wood lathe, so that's how I do some like brass work and such. Like this little hammer here is something that I made. But really when it comes to this ball vise, being ingenuitive and figuring out how to do the work holding that you need to, you can use the starting pins, but just get a bit of brass and a bit of leather, and you can make a bunch of accessories that work for you. So in the end, with some basic modifications, with some simple tools, you can turn a very subpar object into a very good working vise that has really helped me out. Like I've been practicing hammer and chisel engraving, I've been doing push engraving on this thing. The rigidity now with all those shims and stabilizing that bearing has turned this so it doesn't suck the energy out every time I hit or push. It has become a very good object that's helped me out in my little workspace here. So I hope you did enjoy this one. It does require a little bit of ingenuity and time to sink in this, and if I could, I would get the GRS or Lindsay Vise if I had access to it. But being in Australia, being on the other side of the ocean with that nice beach tax, sometimes you can't afford the best tool that you can get your hands on. So the second place is being able to work with what you have and just doing these at the time. Like I know the bearing itself cost me about $100 Australian to put in there. So it's like simple things like some brass and some leather. You're going to amplify just the basics, getting the shim stock. You don't have to do it all at once. You can piece it together and work as you go. But each one of those modifications just turns this into something that's very usable and something that's going to last me until I feel like I'm at a point where I get one of those GRS vices. I know it's on the horizon at some point. Wherever that is, we'll find out. But if you did enjoy this one, definitely give it the thumbs up, because it could help someone else out looking to upgrade their vise that they have access to. I will say that each of these vices are different on the inside. So I haven't seen the 3-inch version. This is the 5-inch version that isn't the Vevor style or GRS clone. It does have its own internals, so you just want to look at that if you can. But it really does improve the working. And if you do have any comments or queries about any of the mods that I've done here, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. I do try and go down there and answer things about this sort of stuff. And really, this is the start of this channel. Like I do want to show more engraving stuff. I do want to show more of the stuff I build at this bench. But really, I think this is something that's deserving to get out there to help out other people. So if you enjoyed this one and you want to stick around, I look forward to seeing you next time.